It's Norm from Tested here, and today I'm going to be reviewing and talking in depth about the new Formlabs Form 3 Plus. This was just announced earlier this month at CES, and I've been very lucky enough to be testing a production unit for the past month or so. And there is a lot to talk about, not just because there are a bunch of improvements and the way those improvements have been implemented both in software and hardware and some of the new accessories, but also since the last time we reviewed the Form 3, almost over 2 years ago now, back in 2019, the landscape of resin printing has really changed. The past year I've really enjoyed testing, and many of you out there embracing MSLA resin printing has really exploded. And so that really means it's a good time to kind of check in on the state of SLA printing, stereolithography, using laser curing of resins, and how that workflow compares, how that technology is still holding up, and what makes this type of printer different than a hobbyist level printer, with this one being definitely more of a professional grade 3D printer. We'll do a little bit of a recap of how this technology works. So fundamentally, the Form 3 Plus looks just like the Form 3. In fact, it's basically like the Form 3. It's the Form 3 with, over the past 2 years, optimized manufacturing, calibration. The hardware benefits aren't because there are necessarily new components or new technologies in here. It's that it's been more refined so that they can push this a little more for faster printing than the previous existing Form 3. And in fact, the Form 3 Plus actually replaces the Form 3. So it's the same price. It's $3,500 for the printer. And if you try to order a Form 3 now, you will get just the Form 3 Plus. But from a fundamental standpoint, it's still resin printing. So a lot of kind of what you see here under the hood will look kind of like the hobby printers that you may have seen. There's a build plate up on top with a Z-axis drive here, and there's a vat or a tank that I'll talk about. But that's kind of where all the similarities end, because underneath here, as opposed to having like UV light, an array of lights that then shine and cure the resin through a masking layer, like an LCD or using a DLP projector, here it's curing the resin layer by layer using a laser system. And in the old Form 2, they had a 2-axis laser array, so it would be kind of housed right here, project up per layer and draw, the outline and the entire area of the layer of the resin that needs to be cured. With the Form 3 and the Form 3 Plus, they moved over to what they call the LPU system. So if you look inside here, it's actually like a big empty cavity, and that's because the laser is tucked away in this mechanical unit over to the side here. And rather than using a 2-axis system where you're projecting the laser across the entire area all at once, the laser actually is projected along one dimension, one axis, this y-axis, and the x-axis gets cured by the mechanical movement of the LPU as it moves along the build plate through the build vat or resin tank. And some of the benefits of that is that it means that there's no chance of dust or resin falling into the LPU when it's not in operation. It gets tucked away. It's a better sealed unit. It's a little more reliable. And that unit itself can be user serviceable replaced. So if it's for some reason you need to replace the LPU, you can actually detach the ribbon cable and get a new one. And then moving up from how that resin is cured from that laser itself to the tank, another big difference in the Formlabs system from what you may have seen is that their vat, is designed to be a consumable. So rather than have one dedicated tank that you get that you might have to pour the resin out, clean it, and put new resin in, the system is designed that you have a dedicated tank for each type of resin that you might be using with this printer. And so this is their vat, their resin tank, the latest version. And just like your MSLA printers, it has a film that the curing laser shoots through, but this film, as opposed to your standard FEP film, is much longer lasting because their tank, it actually has a little bit of give here. You see these rollers on the side, and the film mechanically loosens up after each layer is cured so that there's less stress on the prints and you basically have no marks on the film per layer. So you don't have cloudiness that happens over time, and this can last you for about a year of printing. There are also some other mechanical features that you see in here. So there's a wiper that you install, which wipes not only the bottom of the tank, but also the top of the build plate. And so it does a nice job of mixing that resin, as well as maybe moving any debris that might be there. So you have a little more, less chance of a print failure. And there's also a little bit of a gauge here. There's a thing that floats on top of the resin. So it tells the system how full this tank is because it does auto dispensing. So you're not opening bottles of resin, pouring this in. You actually have a resin cartridge that sits in the back of the printer, and that resin cartridge looks like this. It has a liter worth of resin, and there's a bite valve on the bottom here. So as I plug this in, I actually pop that top, and you heard that sound, so it recognizes what type of resin. It actually recognizes what cartridge it is, and there's a scale that tells the system how much resin is left theoretically, although it's not always perfectly accurate. And the idea is with that sensor in the tank, it'll know how much resin is left in the tank, it'll know how much resin is left in the cartridge, and it'll automatically dispense into the tank either before a print or throughout a print to make sure you never have to open up the hood and pour any resin in manually. The whole idea is the system is supposed to be automated. And the build plate itself, it's a square build plate. It's build area, 5.7 inches by 5.87 inches, same as with the Form 2 and the Form 3, of course, and with the build height of just over 7 inches. So I would consider this in that medium size print category, kind of the equivalent volume-wise as what you get like in the LEU Saturn or the Anycubic Model X, although with a square area, I think you can print bigger objects on this than on those build volumes. But the whole idea with the sensors and the automatic dispensing and even the Wi-Fi built in is to make this process as streamlined as possible. The idea is that this is supposed to be for professionals who are maybe working in teams and want to get many prints done and need the reliability and the consistency to be something they can trust. So the workflow is optimized in the sense that in the software, you're importing your models, you're slicing them, generating your supports, wirelessly then sending it over to the printer, creating a queue, and then it knows what tray, it knows what resin you have, you can pre-prime it and have prints automatically start and also monitor monitor those prints. One of the best things, one of the things I love most about using this printer is their web app dashboard, where I can keep an eye on how many layers have been printed so far, how many prints left, kind of look at my history of prints, and all of those slices are stored so I can very easily queue one up, an old print up, or look at my list of next prints and get the next print started basically right away. All of those very nice to haves when it comes to the prints, especially the blower on the inside is basically essentially a blow dryer that heats the volume up to a little over 80 degrees Fahrenheit, so optimally for the resin. And one of the biggest cases, biggest reasons for print failures on the hobbyist printers is because you have resin that's too cold, or ambient temperature in your garage that's just not warm enough to get that resin sticking to the build plates, requiring longer exposure times. So that's fundamentally how the Form system of 3D printing works. I love this lunchbox design of their resin tanks. So, when I'm swapping between resins and I'm taking one resin tank out, I can store it in this UV protected lunchbox, and then along with my cartridges, and have them on a shelf. But this is a consumable. It's $150 for one of these that you'll need to replace basically once a year if you're printing on the regular. The resin itself, those cartridges are also, they start at about $150. So compared to the hobbyist space, where today you can buy a liter of resin for somewhere between $30 and $40, this is going to be about 4 to 5 times as much. And that's the price you're paying to move into the professional space, where they've tested, calibrated, and validated all of the settings so that it's as much plug and play and automated as possible. So that's the Form 3 kind of technology that we've all known for a couple years. And with the Form 3 Plus, there are both hardware and software improvements. Their biggest selling point, they say, is a 20 to 40% improvement in print speeds. And behind that, the fine print is that actually mostly comes through the software. There are some hardware differences, like the Form 3 and the Form 3 Plus they will print at different speeds, and that's because, like I said, of the manufacturing and calibration improvements they've made over 2 years of making this printer that allows for a more parallel print plane, is what they call it. So the plane between the build plate, that film, as well as the LPU is better aligned so that the first couple layers, the important layers in that raft, or the adhesion layers to the build plate, require much less time. They don't have to do any kind of tilting on the build tank to get that. So that's something you get on the hardware side on the Form 3 Plus. But the rest of it, honestly, is in the slicer software. Over time, as they've been validating more of their presets, they found that they can push the laser closer to its max power of 250 milliwatts. So that decreases the exposure time necessary for the LPU to move across that build plate per layer. And then fundamentally in the way they're generating the support. So here is an example of 2 prints that I did, the exact same model, exact same size, exact same density of supports auto-generated in their system. One with their legacy setting and one with the new default and beta settings. And you can see the truss design in the supports is much less dense in the new one. Another way the truss have been optimized isn't just that they use less resin, but the way the support truss are actually designed, where in the old legacy method, they're kind of all over the place, wherever they need to be, kind of diagonally here and there. In the new system, you can actually see they're lot more of these parallel lines, which are aligned to that y-axis, which makes sense because the LPU, as it's moving along, you can see in the B-roll, it's creating these laser lines. And if the resin supports are along these lines, then the LPU needs to turn on less frequently, which speeds up the prints. But one of the best benefits of the new software is the way they generate the touch support tips themselves. So one of the things I'm always tweaking on my resin printers is the size and the shape of the touch supports. Like, I hate when a print comes out and I'm either damaging the model or I'm using nippers for, half an hour to free the model from the supports. I want to be able to tear them off as quickly as possible. And one of the ways you do that is you can kind of reduce the diameter of that touch point. So on my MSLA printers, I typically have them at that touch point reduced to 4.3 millimeters. Here, you can adjust that as well. The default is 0.4, but you can take them down to 0.2, 0.1. And it's not just the size of that contact point that matters, it's also the shape that's different. It's no longer a cone. You can see in the close-up here in preform, it's actually more of this tapered pyramid that has this two-stage taper. There's the truss that goes up to the tip, and then it tapers up. And then there's the nub that's also this kind of rectangular nub at the end, as opposed to the cylindrical nub that theoretically gives you a lot of stability and a lot of support for these vertical forces as the prints are being pulled off of the vat. But when that comes out, it actually is very easily removed because torsional forces, these kind of twisting forces, these shear forces can tear them off very easily. And I found that with these new print supports on all of my prints, it was so easy using like a 0.2 millimeter support size to tear them off, literally twist them off of the supports with only minor kind of bits and nubs left on that I can easily sand or pick off with some tweezers. Just really improving the quality of the workflow and that experience, the post-processing experience. And in my test prints, I don't have access to a Form 3, so it's all on the Form 3 Plus, doing A/B tests between the default and the legacy settings. I never quite got a 20% increase, but for example, one was a 7-hour print versus with the old settings, over 7.5 hours. And so I'm getting between 5 and 10% improvements just on the software side on a resin like this. And the most I got on a very complex print was about an hour of savings on like a 10-hour print. So about 10% improvements, which is definitely impressive, but I wasn't enabled to, at least just on the software side, get that 20 to 40% improvement, which they cite compared to the original Form 3. And the thing that actually did the most to speed up that workflow is actually a new accessory they also announced earlier this month, and that's their Build Platform 2. Now, this is an accessory that doesn't come bundled with the Form 3 Plus, but it is compatible with the Form 3 and the Form 2. It's something I really wish was bundled with the Form 3 Plus. So this printer comes with their original build plate, which again, 5.7 inches by 5.7 inches. You can get a steel version as well. And you can see in the close-ups, I've done my fair share of kind of scratching this up and unfortunately gouging it a little bit by scraping off the print. It's my least favorite part of resin printing is scraping a print off of the build plate. Like, I can deal with fishing resin pieces out of a vat and having to, clean even an LCD on an MSLA printer, but like having stuck resin on a build plate just kills the momentum. And one of the best things I've used on MSLA printers is a flexible build plate, like the Wham Bam systems. And this is very similar to that, although I think even better. This is the Build Platform 2. I've left a print on that I did recently on there. So it's been in an alcohol bath, so it's clean. But you can see it has this steel build plate here. It fits on right onto the printer, but it also has these two handles. And that's because when a print comes off, I'll demo for you this in real time, you can actually literally take these two handles and I'm gonna press them in, and that will actually bend this plate and pop the print right off. You guys ready for this? Boom, it popped right off. No scraping required. I'll show you what happens if I press it in here. There it goes. And you can see it bowing. So prints on the center of the Build Platform 2 will get the most benefit. But in my test prints, I've littered the entire build plate with objects, and it does, I think, even a better job than the flexible steel plates I've used on MSLA printers. It does magnetically attach as well, so it snaps back right into place. And with this, I was able to go from one print to the next, finish a print, and literally start another print in under 30 seconds. Literally, I would be watching the dashboard on my phone, seeing the last layer, last couple layers, get ready to cure, head to the printer. I have another print queued up using the software, have it already in the system. When it's done, take this out, pop it out, scrape it and clean it just a little bit, get it back in the printer, and I'm starting my next print, like I said, in under a minute, which is mind-blowing. This is the best thing. And it works with Form 3, it works with Form 2. I think it's an essential accessory going forward for anyone with the Formlabs Form 3, Form 2, or Form 3 Plus. And I really wish this is something they bundle with future Form 3 Pluses. There's quite a bit of a backlog of orders for this because it's in such high demand. It changes the way I even think about what can be printed on a resin printer. A print like this is that very popular articulated dragon designed for FDM printing because it's designed to be printed without supports right on the bed of an FDM printer. I would never print this on a resin printer because you'd either need supports or I'd be destroying it by scraping it off. This came right off of the Build Platform 2 with a pop, simple pop. No problem. Same with some of these Hexen Hills tile pieces. They're designed to be printed at an angle, but I can print them straight on and pop off, no problem. Saving not only supports, but also again changing what I think, what my brain thinks I should be able to print, and what I would go to a resin printer for. Highly, highly recommended. But of course, there's one thing we should still talk about, and that's the quality of these prints, which hasn't changed from the Form 3 to the Form 3 Plus. They have the exact same technical specifications, but it's worth looking at how SLA laser-based printing compares with some of the high resolution LCD printers today. When I recently reviewed the Frozen AK Mini, we talked a lot about the LCD escalation, where manufacturers are getting higher density panels and higher resolutions, so that not only are you talking about layer height as one metric of how detailed of a print you can have, but you're also talking about the pixel size, the smallest pixel size for each layer, for when you need those perfectly rounded corners and you don't want to have any aliasing. And I talked about 50 microns, kind of the sweet spot for both layer height and also pixel size in MSLA printers, even though you have printers now that have 35 micron pixel sizes or 22 microns in the case of the Frozen AK Mini. On the Form 3 and the Form 3 Plus, it turns out it's not an apples to apples comparison. Now, layer height, you can absolutely compare those, and the Form 3 allows you to print, on the fast draft resins, 100 microns, 200 microns, 300 microns, but on the detailed resins, 50 microns or even down to 25 microns, but not finer than that. The MSLA printers, you can configure them to print layer heights of 10 microns, although I've never seen anyone actually really do that on a practical level other than stress testing and trying to see how accurate that Z motor is. 25 microns really feels like the thinnest layer height I want to do, and this can absolutely do that. But in terms of the pixel size comparison, well, here it's a laser, so there is no pixel. And if you look at the Form website, the Formlabs website, they cite two specifications. I want to kind of explain what those mean. One is the laser spot size, which they cite as 85 microns. And on paper, 85 microns, that's bigger than 50 microns, bigger than 35 microns. Does that mean that your quality of your prints isn't going to be as fine? That's not the case, because the laser, it's not like a grid of laser spots, not a grid of these 85 micron laser spots. It's a dynamic laser that's moving across the LPU on the X and the Y axis through this X axis motor, as well as the mirrors in the LPU on that Y axis. And so the other spec they list is the XY precision for the LPU, and that's 25 microns. And so while the laser spot you can think of as maybe like a circle of 85 microns, the amount of precision they can place it on a layer is up to this 25 micron accuracy. So it can generate really smooth corners and curves. And in my test prints, looking at the exact print here, one on the Form 3 at 25 micron thickness and the other on the Frozen 8K Mini, also 25 micron thickness, but with the 8K panel, I gotta say the details are better on the Frozen 8K, most notably in the hair detail, as well as on this character model, the lips are just, you can see a little more of that geometry on the lips on the Frozen print versus on the Form print, it's just slightly softer. Now, both of these look like production parts. They're ready to paint and prime. And if you look at the cheeks of this model, there's not a single layer line that's detectable. So this still looks like it was a cast piece. Like, you can't tell that this came out of a 3D printer. If you're going to take a magnifying glass to this, it does look like the 22 micron pixel size of that Frozen 8K Mini will give you more detail in the finest and finest of spots. But if you're looking also at tests, calibration and test prints, this is that Amira Labs Town printed on the Form 3 at 25 microns. It achieves almost every single part of this print with no problem. There's one bit here I'll show in a close-up where these tiny little posts get bent and warped. But other than that, all the text, the relief detail, the overhangs, even the tiny text you see on the side here that's engraved here with these tiny openings, it's all readable and all resolved. And so if you look at these tiny prints, you look at the 1/35th scale models that I've tested and some of the other test prints, the detail is still amazing, and there's plenty of legs in SLA technology yet. At the end of the day, I don't think a lot of people are going to be making these direct comparisons between a Form 3 Plus and a home MSLA printer when making a purchase decision for themselves. I think you kind of know what type of printer you're going to be in the market for based on just price standpoint. MSLA printers are fantastic printers to get started in. Resin printing has never been more accessible. The barrier to entry in price and software and experience has never been lower. And you can print some amazing stuff with MSLA printers. Even if you're doing some very small batch manufacturing for your own Etsy store, I would absolutely recommend going there. What you get when you move into the professional grade printers from like Formlabs is reliability and build quality, and honestly, peace of mind, right? Like you get a very sturdy machine that has so many sensors on the inside that knows how much resin is left, knows the lifespan of the resin tank, gives you that remote dashboard, and just minimizes the workflow so you're spending less time thinking about printing and more time in the design before the printing or in the finishing after the printing. And for a lot of production environments where you're, hardware companies making prototypes, or companies that need these to make molds for effects work, or need parts that go right into production and don't want parts to shrink, you're going to get that certification and that validation of all of that baked in, so it's as easy as possible. And all those benefits do come at a cost. I mean, this is a $3,500 machine, and that's not counting the consumables, that $150 per resin tank and $150 per liter of resin. As an individual, that would be really tough to swallow if you're not making money off of your prints in some production capacity. So I would not recommend this unless you are using this to make money in your business and fits within that price point, and you can take advantage of all of those benefits of the reliability, the support, and the certified system of products. And I still think there is room to improve in the software. I think that, for example, in some of my test prints, there was plenty of resin left in the resin tank, yet the system thought my cartridge was empty because I did some direct pouring, and I had to wait for the system to time out for allowing me to override it to continue a print, which took an hour for that to time out. That could absolutely be reduced. I think they could do better estimates on the print times, which have usually not as conservative or accurate as I would like. Usually the prints have taken about an hour longer than their initial estimates. I think the preform software could use some speed improvements, and maybe be opened up a little more for customization. I love the automated features, the just press and print, but I also want to be able to tinker a little more. And so over time, hopefully those are improvements, software improvements that will come. And if the Form 3 Plus has shown anything, it's that their team of software engineers can still find speed optimizations and also usability improvements on what's fundamentally the same hardware as something that we saw 2 years ago. So for those of you, again, with a Form 3, no need to rush out and buy the Form 3 Plus, but absolutely do consider this new build platform too. This thing alone makes this my favorite resin printing experience I've had so far. I'll be doing more close-up comparisons of 3D prints across the printers I have right now in future videos, so stay tuned for that. But if you have questions about resin printing, SLA printing, MSLA printing, feel free to post them in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.